A deadly house fire in Boise, Idaho claims the lives of a father and his two young stepchildren. As investigators sift through the ashes for answers, they uncover evidence that the blaze was no accident. In Northern California, a man is reported missing, and all indications suggest a tragic accident is to blame. But a routine investigation soon exposes a web of deception, fraud, and possibly murder. When money is at stake, some predators will stop at nothing to exploit another's trust. But even the most complex schemes can't survive the scrutiny of those determined to find justice for victims who have been fatally betrayed. Nestled in the western foothills of the Rocky Mountains, Ada County, Idaho is home to the state capital of Boise. It is also home to some 400,000 residents who work, live, and play here.
This is the fire department.
In the pre-dawn hours of February 10th, 1992, emergency dispatchers received a 911 call. A man reported that his house, a two-story duplex, was on fire, and he believed a family of 4 who shared the house was still trapped inside. Within minutes, firefighters and emergency units from the surrounding area responded to the call. Fire and smoke consumed the duplex. Firefighters struggled to bring the first-floor blaze under control. Rescue workers fought their way through the flames and thick smoke to see if anyone had been trapped inside. In a second-floor bedroom, they discovered a man lying motionless on the bed. A young girl was found on the floor a few feet away. As the search continued, firefighters recovered the body of a young boy in a nearby bedroom. All of the victims were rushed outside for treatment. But despite the rescue workers' efforts, all 3 were pronounced dead at the scene. The man who lived in the separate residence inside the duplex told police that around 4 a.m. he was awakened by his smoke alarm. He tried to wake up the other family, but got no response. He identified the victims as 34-year-old Randy Rowe and his 2 stepchildren. He didn't know the whereabouts of the children's mother, Robin Rowe, who also lived at the residence. Then, 2 women arrived at the scene. One identified herself as Robin Rowe. Visibly shaken by the news, emergency workers escorted the young mother away from the house. Her friend, Joan McHugh, told police that Robin had fallen asleep at her house earlier that evening. Robin had awakened her just a short while earlier and wanted to return home. She had a premonition that something bad had happened to her family. All of the victims' bodies were removed from the scene and transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. Now, Fire Marshal Doug McGrew began looking for clues to tell him how and why the fire started.
We started looking into the ignition source of the fire by doing, like we do on all fires, we do an exterior walk around of the building, we look and see where the least damage is, we go there, and we start working towards the areas where the most damage occurred. Once we get into that area, then we start digging down through and layering through the debris and trying to determine exactly what ignited the fire.
Almost immediately, investigators made a strange discovery. The circuit breaker that controlled power to the family smoke alarm was in the off position. But that did little to explain how the fire started. And because the damage was so extensive, finding those answers would take time. Within hours, autopsies were performed on Randy Rowe and the two children. The medical examiner found lethal amounts of soot and carbon monoxide in each of the victim's lungs and mucous membranes. He concluded that all three had died as a result of smoke inhalation caused by the fire. As the search for the fire's cause continued into the morning hours, arson investigators sifting through the ashes made a troubling find. On the carpet and in a charred pile of laundry, they discovered burn patterns suggesting a flammable liquid had been poured over the area. And the spot was just inches away from vents that circulate air throughout the residence. Investigators collected several pieces of the charred remains for further analysis. All indications were pointing to arson. And that suggested that the fire that had claimed the lives of the two young children and their stepfather had been intentionally set. To find out, State Fire Marshal Don Dillard delivered the charred samples collected from the house to the Idaho State Police Crime Lab, located in Pocatello. By comparing a burned sample believed to contain an accelerant to one that was untouched by the fire, he hoped criminologists could find answers.
What I've asked our criminologists to do is to compare the two, what we feel the one to be evidence, and then the one that we feel probably doesn't have any kind of an accelerant on it, and she compares those two, and by doing that, hopefully comes to the conclusion that there either is or isn't an accelerant involved in the case.
Forensic examiner Susan Williamson began testing the samples for the presence of an ignitable liquid. First, Williamson inserts a strip of charcoal ribbon in the sealed cans that contain the charred samples. Then, the can is placed in a chamber and heated for several hours. If any flammable substance is present, the heat will turn it into vapor, which will then be absorbed by the charcoal strip. Once the evidence has been heated, the charcoal strip is removed from the can. To transform any trapped vapors back into a liquid, solvents are then added to the strip. The resulting liquid is then subjected to sophisticated detection equipment that measures for the presence of known flammable substances. When the process was completed, Williamson analyzed the results.
One of the samples contained an ignitable liquid. And in this case, I identified a heavy petroleum distillate. And heavy petroleum distillates include things like kerosene, number 2 and number 1 diesel fuel, and fuel, heating fuel oil, and so forth.
The analysis had exposed the deadly fire as an act of arson. And more disturbing, it had exposed a triple homicide. Forensic examiners had exposed a house fire in Ada County, Idaho that had claimed 3 lives as a triple murder. The findings were passed on to homicide investigators. Looking for answers, detectives turned to Robin Rowe, the wife and mother of the 3 victims. When asked why she wasn't at the residence on the night of the fire, Robin explained she had been staying at her friend's house. Over the past few months, her marriage had been falling apart.
Well, that was the strange thing.
In fact, Robin believed that her husband Randy might have intentionally set the deadly fire. She said that recently, Randy had become increasingly abusive toward her. The smallest things would set him off, and he couldn't seem to control his anger, even in front of the children. Robin claimed that on one occasion, Randy had struck her so hard she was forced to go to the hospital. Several hours before the fire, Randy had called her at her friend's house and demanded that she come home. When she refused, he threatened that she would never see him or her children again. Though it appeared Randy Rowe had made good on his threats, the story troubled veteran detective Gary Rainey.
Any parent is protective over their children, and had he been this abusive parent, any reasonable spouse would have wanted to remove the kids from that situation. Her story was that he was only abusive with her and not with the kids. That's not the norm, and certainly in law enforcement we recognize that that abusive personality, that violent personality, the anger control problems is not going to just be focused on one particular person, especially with those pre-teen age kids who sometimes anger parents pretty easily.
With their suspicions raised, police wanted to learn more about the Rose marriage and corroborate Robin's alibi. They began with Joan McHugh, the woman who had been with Robin at the time of the fire.
Well, there was some abuse problems.
Because of Randy's abuse, Robin, she said, had been staying with her. That night, Robin had fallen asleep on her couch around 11 p.m.
And then,
Joan went to bed a short while later and never heard anything to suggest Robin ever left the apartment. Joan had no doubt that Robin was a victim of domestic violence.
And she said that it had been going on for quite a while, but she had never said anything to anyone. And it just seemed to escalate over a period of, I don't know, about 4 or 5 weeks. And a few times she came here, 10 or 11 o'clock with the children, because they were escaping from Randy.
The information gave Robin Rowe a solid alibi for the time of the 3 deaths. And the result of the forensic analysis had made it plausible that Randy Rowe had in fact killed himself and his 2 stepchildren in a vengeful act of rage. But that theory would not go unchallenged.
I learned that there had been some domestic violence going on. But then as a couple other people called, and I learned that there wasn't domestic violence going on according to them. And so it just started not adding up very well.
To learn more, police brought in Randy Rowe's sister to answer questions.
Any signs that Robin or the kids were the victims of any kind of violence, any bruises by anybody?
She didn't believe that Robin was the victim of domestic violence, as she had portrayed herself to be.
Ever any discussion?
Though Randy and Robin had begun to fight more and more, he was not a violent person. The kids were Randy's life. His sister knew that he never would have harmed them. And according to the sister, Robin treated Randy as little more than her kid's babysitter. As a result, Randy talked openly about the possibility of divorce. But he loved the children as if they were his own. And the kids made it clear that they didn't want Randy to go.
The children had, at one time, reportedly told Robin that they wanted to stay with Randy and not go with her. And of course, they were Robin's natural children and not Randy's.
To resolve all of the conflicting information about the couple, investigators decided to take a closer look into Robin Rowe's background. What they found was shocking. According to records, Robin had tragically lost a son nearly 15 years earlier. Her 6-year-old boy had died in a suspicious fire at her California home. Arson investigators were never able to determine a cause of the fire. But for Idaho police, the similarities between the tragedies had to be more than coincidental. Robin Rowe was now emerging as the prime suspect in the deaths of her husband and 2 children. But with an airtight alibi and no obvious motive to explain such an unthinkable crime, police knew that proving it would not be easy. Police in Ada County, Idaho, struggled to find answers in a deadly house fire that had claimed 3 lives. Robin Rowe, the wife and mother of the victims, had an airtight alibi for the night of the murders. But all of the evidence was pointing to her as the prime suspect. What investigators needed was proof. Looking for potential clues, they began reviewing statements made by Robin's friends and family.
Husband's kids.
They found that one friend had stated that a few days prior to the fire, Robin had mentioned that she had rented a storage unit and had taken some of her belongings there. The timing of the rental was too close to the murders for police to ignore. Detective Gary Rainey followed up on the lead. Soon, he was able to locate the unit that Robin had rented. With a warrant in hand, investigators were dispatched to the storage unit. There, they found boxes of personal papers belonging to Robin. Among the items was an envelope filled with several $100s in cash and bingo receipts from the YWCA where Robin Rowe worked. Police also collected several life insurance policies taken out on Robin Rowe's husband and her 2 children. Robin was listed as the sole beneficiary on all of the policies, and she stood to gain more than $275,000 from the 3 deaths. It was powerful circumstantial evidence of murder.
One of the most disturbing facts being that she took out the last 2 policies. She already had multiple policies, but Robin took out the last 2 policies on the children January 24th, and the fire was February 10th.
Still, it wasn't enough to take Robin Rowe into custody.
Never really.
Police began interviewing Robin's co-workers at the YWCA. The manager was surprised to learn that cash and receipts had been found in the storage facility. Robin had reported that proceeds from the Y's last bingo game had been destroyed in the house fire that killed her family. Though authorities lacked hard physical evidence of murder, they now had proof of embezzlement. The prime suspect in the triple homicide investigation was placed under arrest and charged with grand theft. But police were a long way from proving that Robin Rowe was a cold-blooded killer. Hoping to generate a lead that could destroy her alibi, details of the crime were released through the media. A short while later, police got a tip. A local newspaper delivery man called and told police that he remembered something unusual on the night of the fire. He said that while making deliveries around 4 a.m. that morning, he saw a car driving away from the duplex. He wasn't sure of the make of the car, but he described it as a late model four-door with rectangular taillights. Detective Ken Smith asked the delivery man to come down to the station.
We had, prior to his arrival at the sheriff's office, had arranged to have vehicles similar to Robin Rowe's vehicle in the back lot, and Robin Rowe's vehicle was in the back lot. We walked him into the lot and asked him to look for vehicles that, or look and see if there were any vehicles that matched the description of the vehicle that he had seen in the subdivision on the morning of the fire. When he observed Robin Rowe's vehicle, he immediately pointed to that vehicle and stated that it was the same body style, same color, and resembled the car that he had seen.
You sure? Definitely.
The witness had placed a car similar to Robin Rowe's near the crime scene just a short while before fire consumed the duplex. Detectives still had to overcome a major obstacle. Robin's friend, Joan McHugh, had provided her with a solid alibi for the time of the homicides. Though police didn't think Joan was lying, they theorized that Robin had managed to slip out of the apartment undetected. Detective Gary Rainey was determined to find out.
I devised a scenario to try to prove or disprove Robin's presence in the apartment, and that was to have Joan confront Robin with the idea that she got up in the middle of the night, 3:30 in the morning, which was the time that we knew about when the fire started, that Joan would tell Robin that she came downstairs to get a drink of water and Robin wasn't there.
When contacted, Joan McHugh agreed that the next time Robin called her from prison, she would tell her the false story and record the conversation. Joan was only too happy to cooperate.
I'm sure, I really shouldn't speak for Detective Rainey, but I'm sure that he believed that somewhere in the phone calls she would absolutely destroy all of her alibis. And I just knew that she was going to explain everything and he was going to feel like a fool because she was innocent. There is no way a mother kills her children. And so I agreed to tape the phone calls.
On the evening of February 20th, Robin called Joan from prison.
Yeah, it's Robin.
There's something that I have to talk to you about. That morning, I came downstairs and you weren't here, Robin. Where were you?
Yeah, I know. I went outside.
It wasn't the answer she expected. Robin repeated her story that at around 3:30 a.m., she was awakened by a strange premonition that something bad had happened to her family. But now, she added that she then contacted a psychiatrist and left the apartment to speak with her for over an hour. On tape, Robin had destroyed her alibi. Joan McHugh was devastated.
It was terrible. And I didn't know what to do after. It was on a tape recording. And it was like, you know, do I call Gary or do I just take this thing and throw it in the trash and no one will ever know? But I would have known. And it probably sounds dramatic, but Randy and the children deserve better than that. So I called Gary.
Police finally had enough evidence to charge Robin Rowe with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Based on the evidence, detectives believe that in the early morning hours of February 10th, Robin Rowe slipped out of her friend's house and returned to her own home. She turned off power to the smoke alarm. Then, driven by a twisted desire to cash in on her family's life insurance policies, she placed a pile of laundry near the air vents and set the deadly blaze. After murdering her husband and 2 children, Robin calmly returned to Joan McHugh's house to establish her alibi.
Psychological experts have described to me that it's simply a balance in her mind of what she personally is better off with. A husband and 2 children or the proceeds of life insurance policies and the opportunity to move to a new state, and that she simply weighed those two things and decided that the money and the new life was what she wanted today.
Robin Rowe was convicted of arson and 3 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of her husband, Randy, and her 2 children. She was sentenced to death. Idaho police had to reconcile conflicting information to find the truth. In California, detectives must follow a complex maze in order to expose a murder. Known for its temperate climate and lush farmland, Yolo County, California offers a quiet rural lifestyle, miles outside the state capital of Sacramento. But residents there are no strangers to tragedy. On the morning of February 5th, 1997, 911 dispatchers at the Yolo County Sheriff's Department received a call from a concerned mother.
Do you have a responsible on that?
She feared that her son was missing. Deputies responded to the home. Patty Howard told the officer that she hadn't seen or heard from her 18-year-old son, Nick, since the previous evening. Patty said that the night before, Nick had helped her close up the auto body shop that the Howard family owned. As they were leaving, Nick said he had to retrieve a wallet he had left behind at a nearby restaurant. He told his mother he would be home in a couple of hours and said goodbye. But around midnight, Nick called and left a message on the answering machine. He said he was having car problems and was running late. But he never made it home that night. The family was very close, and it was completely out of character for Nick not to call and check in. Missing teenagers often turn up within a few days. But for Yolo County Detective Larry Cecchetini, Nick Howard didn't seem to fit the profile of a typical runaway.
This is probably one of the closest knit families that I've ever seen. They just, from all indications, they were a very close, very loving family. For Nick to call and not come home was just something that had never happened before.
Investigators feared the teenager's car troubles had led to an accident. Police, friends, and family retraced his usual route. But after 2 days, the search had turned up nothing. Then, 2 men out on the search flagged down a patrol car near the banks of the Sacramento River. They had discovered tire tracks that led from the shoulder of the road down toward the riverbank.
Right down up here? Right over here. Why do you think these are next?
I figured nobody else would be laying those tracks down there. I don't know.
One of the men, 42-year-old Ralph Marcus, said he was a close friend of the Howard family.
Charles 22, I think we have a 972 that went over the cliff. If you could start dark.
10-4.
Ralph said that he and his associate, Jake Stanton, were out looking for Nick when they came upon the tracks. Unsure if the discovery was related to Nick's disappearance, Detective Cecchetini was contacted. He knew that stretch of highway well, and the news was not encouraging.
That's what I was thinking. This strip of roadway is a winding strip of river road. There are no guardrails on our county side. Quite frequently, inattentive or sleepy drivers do go into the river.
Search and rescue units from the Yolo County Sheriff's Department and officers from the California Highway Patrol responded to the scene. The team followed the tracks down an embankment. They led to the water's edge and then disappeared into the river. Members of the Yolo County Boat Patrol and rescue divers began scouring the river. After several hours of searching, divers signaled they had found something. 16 feet below the surface, they had discovered a vehicle resting on the riverbed. A tow truck pulled the car from the muddy river. The vehicle matched the description of the one driven by Nick Howard. A wallet recovered from the passenger seat contained the driver's license of the missing teenager. Examiners began searching the vehicle for clues. On the floorboard, they found Nick's prescription eyeglasses. They were bent, as if his head had violently impacted the dashboard or the steering wheel. Then, police noticed that a film of oil coated the vehicle's interior. It appeared to have come from an opened container of motor oil located in the back seat. The vehicle was towed to a police impound lot for a more thorough examination. Officers and divers from the boat patrol continued searching the area for any signs of Nick Howard. But there was no trace of the teenager. And if he was unconscious and not wearing his seatbelt when he went into the river, the powerful currents had likely carried his body miles away. With so many unanswered questions, police looked for clues to explain the accident. But aside from the tire tracks at the side of the road, little else was found.
Usually if the vehicle went into the water at a high rate of speed, you're going to have a lot of broken rocks, you're going to have debris, possibly some skid marks, some significant physical evidence.
As the investigation continued, detectives received some unexpected information. Nick Howard's family had handed over some papers they found while going through his room. One was a life insurance policy in the teenager's name that was worth $850,000. There was also an uncompleted change of beneficiary form that listed Ralph Marcus, the man who had discovered the tire tracks at the river, as the new beneficiary. Police were surprised that someone as young as Nick Howard would have such a large insurance policy.
Essentially, he was spending a quarter of his monthly income on a life insurance policy, which struck us as odd. It's not something that, life insurance just isn't something that an 18-year-old thinks about, especially when it costs that amount of money. Why don't you have a seat right there?
And that wasn't the only troubling news. An acquaintance of Nick Howard's came forward with information.
Tell me about Nick's life insurance.
He believed that Nick was alive and well. Recently, he said, the teenager had boasted that his life insurance policy would make him a millionaire.
He had this big policy.
All he had to do was fake his own death, disappear, and then have Ralph Marcus collect on the policy. A polygraph test later confirmed he was telling the truth. The frantic search for a missing teenager had taken an unexpected turn. Now, investigators had to consider that Nick Howard had staged the auto accident and his own disappearance. To find out, police enlisted the aid of the California Highway Patrol's Accident Reconstruction Unit. Using the tire tracks found by the side of the road as his guide, investigator Steve Walker surveyed the scene. Detailed measurements indicated that the car had left the road at a 45-degree angle. and there was no evidence of vaulting or bouncing onto the shoulder. That suggested the car was traveling no faster than 14 miles per hour when it left the road. It was unlikely that a sleeping or inattentive driver had caused the vehicle to end up in the river. And there was no evidence suggesting that a collision had taken place.
There was no debris, there were no fluids, stains on the roadway. There was nothing that you typically see in a traffic collision. It was very, very anomalous. And it likewise fit the idea that the car had not departed from the roadway in a violent manner, that it was set up to leave the roadway in a more controlled manner.
Police next examined the engine of Nick Howard's car, looking for any mechanical problems that could explain the accident. Almost immediately, they found a clue. A plastic bottle cap had been intentionally wedged into the engine's throttle, holding it open. And the cap had originated from the opened container of motor oil recovered from the vehicle's interior. With their suspicions raised, police turned to auto expert Charles Radford of the California Highway Patrol. To determine the significance of the findings, he conducted an experiment. He wedged the cap into the throttle of a car with a similar manual transmission engine. He put the car in gear and then turned on the ignition. The engine revved up to 6,000 RPMs and then lurched forward.
And we could get speeds in second of as high as 20 miles an hour, and in fourth gear it was approximately 15 miles an hour within a 100 to 150 foot range. What this shows is that it would be very easy for someone to be able to take a car and put it in the river by use of an oil bottle cap.
All of the evidence police had gathered now led them to believe that 18-year-old Nick Howard had in fact staged his own disappearance. And now he was wanted for questioning in the elaborate insurance fraud scheme. But so far, all efforts to locate the teenager had turned up nothing. Police in Yolo County, California continued their search for 18-year-old Nick Howard. While looking for answers, they uncovered evidence suggesting the teenager and his friend, Ralph Marcus, had staged the disappearance. It appeared to be an elaborate scam to collect on a life insurance policy worth $850,000. But with Nick Howard's whereabouts uncertain, police turned their focus to Ralph Marcus, the beneficiary of the insurance policy. A background check on the 42-year-old heightened Detective Larry Cecchettini's suspicions that the disappearance was in fact a hoax and that Ralph Marcus was somehow involved.
Ralph Marcus had done thefts, identity scams, insurance fraud, bankruptcy fraud. He was a drug runner.
Under questioning, Ralph Marcus denied any involvement in Nick's disappearance. And he knew nothing about any insurance scams.
Tell me about your relationship with Nick.
Ralph said he had been a friend of the Howard family for years. Nick was like a godson to him. He was shocked to learn that he was the beneficiary of Nick's life insurance policy. Ralph said he wasn't interested in the money. Police sensed he was lying. But with no hard evidence, they had no choice but to release him. The investigation was going nowhere. Then, on February 25th, 1997, 3 weeks after Nick Howard disappeared, Yolo County Police got a break. But it wasn't one they had expected. A man fishing on the Sacramento River had called police after discovering human remains. Less than a mile from where Nick Howard's car was found, police recovered the partially decomposed remains of a young man. The victim, found with a single glove on his right hand, matched the description of the missing teenager. And dental records later confirmed that Nick Howard had finally been found. With no obvious cause of death, the body was transported to the Yolo County Coroner's Office. There, forensic pathologist Dr. Brian Peterson began looking for answers.
Here's some pictures of the body, how we found them on scene.
A close examination of the glove and the clothing indicated that no traces of motor oil were present. And that suggested the victim was not in his car when it went into the water. For Detective Cecchetini, the findings didn't make sense.
A couple of things just didn't add up. For one, the body was wearing one glove, which we thought was somewhat unusual. I remembered that the car was coated with motor oil when we initially located it, but yet there were no traces of motor oil on the clothing. Granted, he'd been in the water for some time, but the traces of motor oil are not going to be entirely washed from the body.
Dr. Peterson next looked to establish a cause of death. Fluid found in the victim's lung suggested Nick Howard had drowned. But there was also something else.
Additionally, there were changes consistent with manual strangulation, bleeding inside the muscles of the neck.
Nick Howard had been murdered. For the Howard family and for investigators, the discovery was devastating. In addition to the tragic loss, it was now clear that Nick Howard had not staged his own disappearance. And Ralph Marcus was now the prime suspect in his death.
Now we have a body. We've pretty much determined that the body was not in the car when it went in. We have an $850,000 potential life insurance payout, and we have the beneficiary, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we get to the bottom line on this and get to the truth of what happened.
Police contacted the insurance agent in nearby Sacramento who handled Nick's policy. According to records, Nick came in a few weeks before he disappeared requesting that Ralph Marcus be named the new beneficiary. But he didn't have all of the correct paperwork, and the change was not completed. But Nick didn't seem to understand, and the agent believed that he left that day convinced that his policy had in fact been updated.
In the insurance agent's opinion, when Nick left, he was under the impression that the change was completed and that Ralph Marcus was the beneficiary.
Though incriminating, the information fell short of the smoking gun investigators would need to prove murder. Then they got a break. A witness asked Detective Cecchetini to meet him at a pier on the Sacramento River. Jake Stanton, the man who was with Ralph Marcus when the tire tracks were discovered at the river, believed he had important information about the case. Jake said that shortly after Nick went missing, Ralph had asked for his help in searching for the teenager. While driving along the Sacramento River, Ralph pulled up to the pier. He said it was one of Nick's favorite spots. As they searched the area, Jake saw Ralph Marcus walk to the end of the pier toward a black glove.
As Jake turns around, he sees Ralph ditch the glove off the top of the pier. Before Jake even says anything, Ralph mentions to him, "I was trying to get the glove."
Detectives showed Jake the black glove recovered from Nick Howard's body.
You ever see anything that looks like this?
He was certain it was identical to the one Marcus had kicked off the pier.
Jake was adamant about the fact that Ralph was trying to kick the glove off so that it could not be recovered. The significance of this is that we had never told anybody that when Nick was found, he was wearing one glove.
The information brought police one step closer to proving that Ralph Marcus had murdered 18-year-old Nick Howard. But so far, all of the evidence was circumstantial. Police in Yolo County, California were now certain that 18-year-old Nick Howard had been murdered for his life insurance policy, worth $850,000. All of the evidence suggested that Ralph Marcus, the beneficiary of the policy, was responsible. The suspect was brought in for another interview. Police showed him the black glove that had been recovered from the victim. Though witnesses saw Marcus kick an identical glove into the Sacramento River, he claimed he hadn't seen one like it before. Marcus continued to insist that he had no knowledge of Nick's life insurance policy and was in no way involved in his death. He pointed to the fact that he had gone to great lengths to help find Nick after he disappeared. But detectives believe that Ralph Marcus had only done that in order to divert attention from himself.
Thank you very much.
Authorities obtained a warrant to search the home Ralph Marcus shared with his mother. There, they found several documents relating to Nicholas Howard's insurance policy. And Marcus was in the process of filing a claim for the $850,000. The suspect was well aware of Nick's life insurance policy, something he had repeatedly denied. He was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder. Police believe that Ralph Marcus was able to get 18-year-old Nick Howard to agree to stage his own death after making him the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. But Marcus never intended to split up the money. Once the plan was in place, he beat and strangled the teenager, then tossed him into the river to die. After placing the teenager's wallet and glasses inside the vehicle, Marcus rigged the engine of Nick's car with an oil cap and sent the vehicle into the water, hoping his death would appear as an accident. Ralph Marcus was convicted of the first-degree murder of Nicholas Howard and sentenced to life in prison. Greed and self-interest can be strong motivations for murder. And when the killer is cunning, the truth can be elusive. But detectives and forensic scientists are dedicated to finding justice for unsuspecting victims who have found themselves betrayed. In Ohio's capital, a field becomes a graveyard when a woman's body is discovered. But solving the murder would be a challenge. Detectives turn to a difficult and rare technique in hopes of finding her killer. 911 receives a desperate call in Fort Worth, Texas. A man's wife is shot. Forensic investigators search for clues in unlikely places, hoping the victim herself could provide information needed to determine how and why she died. Whether a crime is meticulously planned or carried out in a moment of passion, perpetrators leave behind evidence. With a discerning eye, investigators reveal fatal impressions killers leave behind. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. Columbus, the capital of Ohio, is known for its wholesome Midwest values. A growing community where the rate of violent crime is much lower than other cities its size. Yet on November 7th, 2001, Richard Middleton made a startling discovery. In a vacant lot, he found the body of a nude female lying in a tangle of overgrown weeds. He immediately called 911. The operator on call dispatched a team of investigators to the site. Columbus police officers and medical technicians arrived at the location, south of downtown Columbus.
Bill, what you got?
The victim was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators roped off the area and started gathering evidence. They hoped to piece together the events that left a woman dead.
Is that the only mark?
As they processed the crime scene, investigators noted the victim's position. She was lying on her back. Her arm was raised above her head, and her undergarments were pulled down around her ankles. But the most alarming evidence found by the crime techs were ligature marks on the victim's neck. They suspected she was strangled. Investigators gathered a few items of clothing, including a black and white tennis shoe found near the body. Despite all their findings, police uncovered no solid leads. They were a long way from finding the killer. Ronald Jester was the first detective on the scene.
Well, we had very little forensic evidence at the scene. There was no weapon, nothing to indicate who she may have been with, where she had been. We found no identification of her. There's no way of tracing her to any particular spot or anything. None of the things that you hope you find that will give you a direction to begin to look for a suspect.
Investigators also spoke to neighbors in the area. Several said they heard screaming earlier, but they thought it was just kids playing in the field. But no one remembered seeing anyone or anything suspicious. Crime techs photographed the area as well as the body.
Okay, Phil, you ready to bag her right hand?
They carefully preserved the woman's hands. They hoped material found under her fingernails could provide clues. The body of the victim was then transported to the Franklin County Coroner's Office. There, they took more detailed photos, focusing on several bruised areas. Dr. Brad Lewis, the Franklin County coroner, performed the autopsy. He noticed the marks on the victim's neck. After analyzing the wounds, Dr. Lewis was able to determine the cause of death.
She had blunt trauma, which means she'd been beaten throughout the body, arms, and legs. She had also been strangled, which was the actual cause of her death.
They collected tissue and other material samples found under the victim's fingernails. The forensic team detected heavy bruising that indicated evidence of rape. Using a rape kit, they gathered possible DNA evidence left from her assailant. All evidence was sealed and sent for further analysis. The examiner then took her fingerprints in the hopes of finding out who she was. When police submitted the prints to the Ohio Fingerprint Data Bank, they quickly confirmed her identity. The victim was Tina Baxter, age 29. She had a police record for several minor offenses. Police also learned that she had had many addresses. She had been drifting from place to place and from job to job. At the Columbus Crime Lab, criminalist Amarina Clarkson analyzed the evidence gathered at autopsy. She examined the rape kit findings as well as the victim's clothes. She also analyzed the stains found on the victim's undergarments for traces of blood and DNA.
We were able to tell that the swabs had semen present by using a color test that will indicate that there's a possibility of semen being present. After we do that color test, we then use a test that looks for a protein that is only found in high levels in semen.
This information confirmed sexual assault and gave investigators DNA information about the assailant. Yet they had no suspect to compare to the samples. His identity remained a mystery. To get more information about Tina, detectives questioned the victim's relatives and friends,
When's the last time you saw her?
including her brother.
Well, just a couple days ago.
Baxter's brother told police Tina had had problems in the past. She used drugs, but she was trying to get her life together. Her brother explained that she was a devoted mother who was involved with her children. But he was afraid that Tina may have had a relapse. He said that in the past, it wasn't unusual for Tina to go on a drug binge and disappear for a few days. He told detectives the names of bars she frequented. If Tina had given in to her addiction, she would not have to look far to satisfy her cravings. Detectives went to the bar where Tina was known to hang out.
Excuse me, sir. I've seen this woman here before.
When he passed her picture around, patrons recognized her, but none could place her there on the night she was murdered.
Bob Johnson.
Victim.
Detectives hit a dead end. The investigation was stalled. In order to spark some theories, investigators pulled together a team to analyze all aspects of the data they had recovered. The team offered different scenarios based on the evidence.
Forensic evidence at the scene.
Marks on her legs looks like she put up some sort of a struggle, and whoever took her clothes off of her had to fight with her to get her clothes off.
But they were coming up empty. They found nothing that could advance their case.
Found all of her clothing strewn in the air.
They were still no closer to a suspect. But that was about to change. Only 11 days after finding Tina's body, a construction worker at a South Columbus job site picked up some tools. Something caught his attention in the underbrush. When he took a closer look, he made a horrifying discovery. The nude body of a female lay lifeless on the ground. Detectives arrived at the crime scene. It was a place they'd been before. This location was only a few hundred feet from where they found Tina's body. Detective William Gillette drove to the crime scene.
Detective Jester and I were driving to the scene and we were discussing some of the similarities that the patrol officers had told us over the air.
It quickly became apparent the evidence at this location was frighteningly similar to Tina's murder. A young woman stripped of her clothing with signs of sexual assault. Detective Gillette surveyed the crime scene.
What we first noticed was that the victim was in pretty bad shape, and it appeared she had been drugged for a distance and put up maybe a pretty good struggle.
Crime scene investigators once again collected evidence. They gathered what was thought to be her clothing, undergarments, sneakers, which were discarded near the body. Investigators then spotted something unusual.
Appears we have some bruising here on the arm, down by the wrist, and also here on the forearm. Those actually look like fingers.
Yeah.
So
They noticed distinct bruising on her arm in the shape of a hand. They hoped it might prove a clue to the killer's identity.
You could see on her right arm where there was a lot of bruising, and you could see actual finger indentions were left on her skin. I thought it might be possible to get fingerprints off of that area.
The crime technicians were careful not to disturb the body. If they could lift prints from the bruise, they would have to take great care not to destroy them. To preserve the body for this type of analysis, detectives did not bag the victim. They needed to keep the body's temperature at approximately 70 degrees to ensure the fingerprints could be lifted successfully.
He said he didn't touch anything. He immediately then went.
Any colder, and the fingerprint powder would not stick, making the lift impossible. It appeared as if the earlier murder was not an isolated incident. Investigators were now dealing with 2 crimes, but possibly only one killer. And that killer was stalking the area. He had already found his second victim. They needed to stop him before he added a third. In Columbus, Ohio, 2 women were found dead, their unclothed bodies discarded in remote locations on the city's south side. Both women were found face up. Investigators determined that the first victim, Tina Baxter, was strangled and sexually assaulted. Yet they had no suspect matching DNA samples. And the circumstances surrounding the second victim were hauntingly similar, with one difference.
There was a bloody rock that was lying next to her.
It appeared she had died from a blow to the head rather than strangulation. Detective William Gillette continued to canvass the second crime scene, which was less than a football field away from where Tina Baxter was found. He noticed distinct tire tracks in the shaly soil leading from the scene of the crime.
You could see where there were fresh tire tracks made by what appeared to be a pickup truck.
Crime techs took photographs and measurements of the tracks. But because of the loose soil, they could not make a plaster cast of the markings. At the State Crime Lab in Columbus, the body was autopsied. Investigators utilized the most advanced forensic techniques to examine the body. The victim had a distinct bruise in the shape of a human hand on her arm. Coroner Dr. Brad Lewis examined the bruises and determined that there was a clear sign of a struggle.
She had multiple abrasions and contusions on her arms, legs, and body. She also had significant blunt trauma to her neck.
They took photographs recording their particular shape and location.
Some other evidence from the guy's body in addition to the possibility.
Specialists then tried to find evidence undetectable by the human eye in normal light.
What we're going to do with this is look for hairs and fibers that may have been shed onto her body by the suspect. We're also looking for hairs and fibers that she may have picked up from his car.
Using an alternate light source, they looked for these obscured clues. But this examination yielded nothing significant. Lab technicians then proceeded with a fairly complex and rarely successful procedure. They would attempt to lift the perpetrator's fingerprints from the body itself. Special Agent Gary Wilgus supervised the attempt.
The possibility of getting prints off human skin is remote. There's only been about 75 to 80 documented cases in the nation where prints have actually been taken off of bodies.
To lift these prints, technicians first placed a plastic tent over the body. This created a makeshift fumigation chamber. They then placed a container filled with a superglue substance known as cyanoacrylate into a warming plate. As the glue heats up, fumes are emitted.
15 minutes. Those fumes from the heated superglue adhere to the body and the latent fingerprints. Then what we try to do is take magnetic powder, which is a special type of fingerprint powder, and we start to process the body, searching for any kind of indication that print may exist.
This powder consists of superfine magnetic filaments which adhere to the superglue residue. Any identifiable prints become evident. A gel is applied to these markings, which then solidifies after a few minutes. The dried substance is then lifted off the skin, taking any print impressions with it. The bruises on the victim's arm yielded no prints. Yet on her right thigh, they discovered another possible clue, a perfectly intact palm print. But most databases do not record palm prints. So even if the killer left his mark, investigators still had nothing to go on. Forensic technicians proceeded with the examination. They took inked prints from the victim's fingers. An ID was made immediately. Her name was Kathy Henderson. She too, like the first victim, had a police record and a history of drug use. Detectives notified the family.
Sir, but this afternoon we found your daughter, and she is a victim of a homicide.
Tell me exactly what happened that night.
Midnight.
They questioned Kathy's roommate and a friend.
Around for a little while, you know, and she was kind of bored, so she
The friend remembered the night Henderson disappeared. Kathy's friend said that the three of them had been cruising around. At about midnight, he dropped off her roommate in downtown Columbus. Kathy asked to be left off as well, but asked him to wait. She'd be back. He said he suspected she was trying to score some drugs.
So she wanted to go back to the bar. I guess she wanted.
He waited for her, but she never returned.
Very good. Well, thank you. Here's
Frustrated, he went home.
Do you recollect anything else?
That was the last time they saw Kathy alive. News of the Kathy Henderson murder made front-page headlines. Police knew this would create fear within the Columbus community, but they hoped it would lead to more clues about the two crimes. It didn't take long before a witness came forward.
Bill, it's Mr. Dooley.
Hi, Mr. Dooley, how are you?
He said he saw a dark pickup truck in the early morning hours at the construction site where Henderson's body was found.
Yeah, well, I typically drive to work down here.
As he drove past, he noticed the vehicle. The headlights were on, but he did not see anyone inside.
Can you describe that vehicle to us?
He said he really didn't think much about it until he read the newspaper articles about the murders.
Maybe you can point out where you saw the vehicle.
He then showed investigators exactly where the vehicle had been parked.
Where the construction site, I've never seen it there before.
Okay.
Detectives went to the construction area where the truck was sighted and questioned the workers at that location.
Be any reason for a vehicle to be on your lot?
The workers confirmed it was unusual for a vehicle to be there on a Sunday. They also told detectives that none of the employees owned a truck that fit the description. Detectives believed time was running out. They were no closer to identifying a suspect, and the Columbus community was living in fear. Since both victims were found so close to one another, they decided to try and stop him before he reached victim number 3. Police set up surveillance near the crime scenes. If their suspect came back, they would be there, waiting. Detective Russell Redman believed it was only a matter of time before the killer struck again.
It concerned me very much the fact that we had a serial killer in the city of Columbus preying on women. Anybody could have been his next victim.
Police ran a 24-hour surveillance detail at the construction site. They knew they had to catch the killer before he struck again. But only 4 days after Kathy Henderson's murder, the detectives' fears were confirmed. An office worker on the south side of Columbus was taking out the trash to a dumpster. He noticed the body of a woman lying on the ground. He immediately called police. Detectives believed it was victim number 3. The killer had struck again. A third woman turned up dead within the span of only a few weeks. Detectives were notified and left for the scene of the crime. The latest victim was a young white female. She was found in the same vicinity as the other two.
A couple more.
There appeared to be blood around her mouth and on her hands. She wore a black sweatshirt and sweatpants. The pockets had been turned inside out. Detective Redmond's worst fear had become reality.
We felt very strongly that this scene and this homicide victim were connected to the other two.
The victim was identified as Beth Ellen Fisher. She fit a similar profile as the other victims. She had a criminal record for petty crime, drifted from job to job, and had a history of drug abuse. She was strangled and sexually assaulted. The MO appeared to be the same as the other murders. Yet, unlike the other crime scenes, police got an unexpected break. Detective Russell Redmond noticed tire tracks leaving the area, similar to those found near Tina Baxter's body.
They pulled in and turned around.
But this time, there was evidence the tire had actually come off its rim.
I noticed that there was a pattern in the graveled area of a parking lot. The pattern was very strange, and it took me a few minutes to realize that it was, in fact, a wheel mark from somebody driving a vehicle on a flat tire.
They followed the markings the wheel left behind. The tracks led to a pickup truck only 50 feet from where the woman's body had been found. The tire was visibly off the rim. When the truck had pulled into the crime scene, the tire was fully inflated. But sometime soon after, the tire blew, leaving the rim bare and the vehicle undrivable. The license plate was still on the vehicle. Investigators photographed the distinct tire marks and detailed the course the truck traveled. DMV records determined the owner of the truck was a local man who owned a tree trimming business. They brought the man in for questioning. He told police he didn't know the whereabouts of his truck. Detectives told him that it had been abandoned near the scene of a crime. He claimed he had lent it to one of his employees, a man named Christian Fuhr. He said Fuhr needed the truck because his own vehicle had been impounded. The owner of the truck gave consent to a search of the vehicle. Investigators found no forensic evidence placing Beth Ellen Fisher inside the truck. Detective Redmond brought Christian Fuhr in for questioning. He remained very cool. He did not show much emotion. Fuhr told the detective that on the evening of Fisher's murder, he had met two girls and went driving around in their vehicle. He said the girls dropped him at a bar around 4 a.m. and he went home. Detective Redmond suspected Fuhr's alibi wouldn't hold up.
During the initial stages of the investigation, being aware that his truck was, in fact, within 50 feet of where the body was found, and he denied being in that area, we knew immediately that he was lying to us. We're going to talk today about...
Detectives now had a viable suspect, but they did not even have enough evidence to link him to one murder, and they needed to link him to all three.
Definitely a good suspect in this particular case.
While the detectives ran 24-hour surveillance on the suspect, forensic teams searched the area around the construction site to look for any evidence that would tie Christian Fuhr to the murders. But their search turned up nothing. Then, detectives got a break. A woman came forward.
Last time I saw her, she was on
She said she had been helping all three victims kick their drug problem.
like a Ford pickup truck.
She told police she had important information about the night Beth Ellen Fisher was killed. She remembered running into a man who said Beth Ellen owed him $50. They both left, got in a black pickup truck, and drove off together. The woman knew Beth Ellen referred to the man as Woodman. He had this nickname because he worked for a tree trimming company. Police finally had probable cause to obtain search warrants for the Christian Fuhr vehicle. Since Fuhr's vehicle was already impounded on another unrelated parking violation, police were able to move quickly. Forensic technicians arrived to process the truck. ink prints were made of the tires. Detective Redman and his team knew they had to get this serial killer off the street. At the Columbus Crime Lab, criminalist Heather Kroc reviewed tire track photos taken from the scene of the second murder. She compared these to the truck Fuhr owned.
I was able to say that the tread pattern in the impression had the same class characteristics or similar tread pattern to one of the tires on the suspect's vehicle.
With consistent characteristics matching the tire, police believe they could now place two different trucks that Fuhr had driven, his own and the one he borrowed from his boss, at two of the murder sites. But they needed to definitively prove that Fuhr had actually been there. Police obtained a court order to collect blood and saliva samples from Christian Fuhr. Forensic technician Amarina Clarkson examined the DNA samples to see if there were any similarities.
Just turn our finger over onto this cloth.
Clarkson was able to confirm what police suspected.
When I compared the samples of the semen found on the victim's body and the bloodstain standard from Christian Fuhr, I found that those samples matched each other.
Investigators corroborated this with other evidence taken from Kathy Henderson's body. Robin Roggenbeck, a forensic scientist for the Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation, compared the palm print found on the second victim's body to those collected from Fuhr.
I found 12 to 13 points that did match positively. In my opinion, this was 100% identification. I had two other qualified examiners verify these prints, and they also came up with the same conclusion.
This evidence not only proved Fuhr had touched the woman, it also meant he had done so after she had died, since prints on living skin will disappear quickly due to perspiration and body movement. Armed with these facts, detectives brought in Fuhr to interrogate him again.
Christian, we want to talk to you today about 3 women been murdered in the south end of Columbus.
They presented him with the details of what they had uncovered, but he refused to talk.
Tracks from your tires on your truck.
Even without a confession, the evidence was overwhelming.
Christian, I'm sorry, but I have no other choice but to charge you with the murder of the 3
On November 28, 2001, police arrested Christian Fuhr on 3 counts of murder. Using forensic evidence, investigators pieced together the events that led to Kathy Henderson's murder. Fuhr had probably lured Kathy into his truck by promising her drugs. He then drove to the construction site. There, he became violent. Her resistance only fueled his rage. Out of control, he found a rock and struck her dead. In order to avoid the death penalty, Christian Fuhr eventually pled guilty to all 3 murders. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Some killers prey on strangers, making it easier for them to conceal their identity. Others strike closer to home, leaving traces that are more difficult to hide. Fort Worth, Texas is known as the city where the West begins. With its rich cowboy heritage, guns outnumber people 3 to 1. But rarely do the citizens believe they'll be used to commit violent crime.
Fort Worth 911 operator L350, what is your emergency?
Yet on the night of March 14, 1995, violence was all too present. A dispatch officer received a frantic 911 call. The caller identified himself as Warren Horenick, a former police officer. He explained that his wife had shot herself and needed an ambulance. Fort Worth police officers responded immediately. When paramedics arrived, Warren Horenick met them at the door. He had blood on his shirt. His wife, Bonnie, lay on her bed. Paramedics noticed what appeared to be a gunshot wound to the chest. They tried to find a pulse or any signs of life, but they were too late. Bonnie Horanek was dead. Crime technicians and investigators arrived at the scene and began collecting evidence. When detectives searched the bedroom, they found 2 weapons, a shotgun and a .38 caliber revolver. Detective J.D. Roberts of the Fort Worth Police Department was the lead investigator.
We're through with the crime scene process.
He retraced the path of the bullet.
The projectile had gone completely through her, through the mattress, through the springs, and had damaged the carpet under the bed.
The bullet's trajectory indicated that it had passed through the victim while she was lying on the bed. There were no bullet fragments found anywhere in the room. Detectives noted a pillowcase wrapped tightly around Bonnie's neck. But there was no evidence that indicated a struggle. Police examined the doors and windows to see if there were signs of forced entry. But there was nothing out of the ordinary. This had not been a break-in. In Fort Worth, Texas, Bonnie Horanek was found shot to death in her bedroom. There was no evidence of a break-in, and detectives suspected suicide. Detectives needed to speak with Bonnie's husband to try and piece together the events that led to her death. But the way Warren was acting, Police Detective J.D. Roberts knew it would be a challenge.
He had been drinking, and he was belligerent towards the officers, and not really cooperative.
Horanek told the officers that he loved his wife and couldn't believe that she had shot herself. Since he was the only one in the house at the time of his wife's death, he needed to give a formal statement and was escorted to the police station. Investigators asked Horanek what happened that night. He told police that he and Bonnie had gone out to dinner, where he admitted to having a few beers. When they returned home, Bonnie had gone straight to bed. She was an attorney and had appointments early the next morning.
Oh, no, don't worry. I'm just going to watch.
Warren said he wasn't tired, so he stayed up in the living room to watch TV. Shortly after they both settled in, Warren said he heard a single gunshot. Startled, he quickly grabbed his shotgun and headed into the bedroom. He thought there was an intruder in his home. To his horror, he said he found his wife shot, and she wasn't moving.
I checked her, I grabbed her.
He phoned 911 and performed CPR in a desperate effort to revive her. He said the 911 operator instructed him to wrap the pillowcase around Bonnie's neck to control the bleeding. When asked where his wife got the handgun, Warren Horanek told detectives the .38 caliber revolver found in the bedroom was his. It was kept in a holster under the mattress on Bonnie's side of the bed.
Is there anything else that you can tell me about what you did?
Detectives asked Horanek to submit to a gunpowder residue test.
I got home.
He agreed, but there was no trace of gunpowder.
Went to sleep. That's it.
Investigators also requested that Horanek's clothing be sent to the crime lab for forensic analysis.
What were you drinking? How close was the shotgun?
Although all the evidence appeared to point towards suicide, detectives needed to complete the investigation. They told Warren Horanek to go home and they would call him with any further questions. Investigators hoped the autopsy would provide the answers needed to close the case. The coroner examined the body and determined Bonnie was shot once in the chest. He noted the bullet's path. It entered the chest and exited her back. No bullet fragments were recovered from the body. In many ways, her death appeared to be a suicide. The angle of the wound and the position, just to the left of center, was consistent with a self-inflicted injury. But other evidence pointed in a different direction. When a gun is fired, it usually leaves behind traces of gunpowder on the shooter. The coroner examined the victim's hands for signs of gunpowder residue. None was found. Unable to definitively prove either homicide or suicide, the official autopsy report characterized the death of Bonnie Horinek as undetermined. Detective J.D. Roberts had many questions.
During the investigation of this death of Bonnie Horinek, it appears that the crime scene had been tampered with. Since no projectile was found, her hands apparently had been wiped clean because there was no blood on her hand.
In an attempt to prove the suicide theory, detectives met with Bonnie's parents. But often, family members don't want to accept that their loved one committed suicide.
Questions about Warren Horinek. Can you tell me a little
Bonnie's parents were no different. They refused to believe their daughter had taken her own life. The only stress they were aware of was her marriage. Bonnie had told her parents Warren was struggling with a drinking problem.
And in fact, he lost his job.
She said she considered leaving her husband, but was trying to make the marriage work. Although her parents said nothing specific, they believed Warren Horinek may have had something to do with their daughter's death.
And he had problems with
Bonnie's parents urged the detective to keep the investigation open. But with little to go on and no solid proof of either murder or suicide, detectives had hit a dead end. The evidence they did have divided investigators right down the middle. The gun was checked for fingerprints, but the surface of the gun's handle was not conducive to prints, and none were recovered. Detective Jim Varnon, who was also assigned to the case, believed the facts clearly pointed to suicide.
No gunshot residue found on the hands of the decedent doesn't mean much to us because not all guns emit gunpowder residue when they're fired.
Investigators needed to determine how much residue the gun typically left behind.
That gun was tested and it was found to be a very clean firing gun. It doesn't emit gunshot residue. So it's no surprise that we did not find gunshot residue on the hands of Bonnie Horinek or Warren Horinek.
Once again, no solid proof. The investigation was at a standstill. Detectives turned to another piece of evidence found at the crime scene, hoping it would provide clues as to what occurred that night. At the Fort Worth Crime Lab, blood spatter expert Max Courtney examined Warren Horinek's blood-stained shirt. Courtney needed to determine where Horinek was when his wife was shot. Was he close enough to have her blood spattered across his chest? But his findings were far from conclusive.
The bloodstains on Warren Horinek's shirt consisted of small to medium-sized blood droplets, which would be consistent with blood from a gunshot wound, or also equally consistent with expirated blood that might have come perhaps from Bonnie Horinek's chest wound while he was doing CPR on her.
This information appeared to support the theory that Warren had tried to save Bonnie's life, not take it. Given the lack of evidence proving murder, there seemed to be only one obvious conclusion.
Bonnie Horinek took her own life. It was a very typical suicide.
To control his
Bonnie's parents continued to suspect Warren Horinek had killed their daughter. They refused to accept suicide as the cause of death. But at this point, there was no other evidence that pointed to the contrary. The official cause of death would remain undetermined. And unless someone could uncover new evidence, that is the way it would stay. In Fort Worth, Texas, Bonnie Horinek was found on her bed, shot to death. There was evidence that indicated suicide, but nothing in the victim's past to support it. The state of their marriage, the lack of gunshot residue, and the fact that her husband Warren had blood on his shirt all raised suspicions.
Grab my gun.
The coroner wasn't certain whether her wounds indicated suicide or murder. Because preliminary forensic analysis was inconclusive, the DA knew it would be impossible to get an indictment. Bonnie's parents refused to believe their daughter took her own life. Frustrated, they enlisted the help of private attorney Mike Ware to look into the case.
I'd known Bonnie. I believed very, very strongly that this was not a suicide. So if it wasn't a suicide, the only other logical conclusion was that it was a homicide.
Ware checked Warren Horenek's record as a police officer, reviewing his personnel file. The facts were troubling. While on the force, Horinek had accumulated a string of drunk and disorderly charges. And he discovered something even more disturbing. On several occasions, he fired his weapon at home. After one of his more violent outbursts, Bonnie called police to try and calm her husband down. But Horinek was out of control. He was detained and ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation.
As I looked more and more into the case, it was very obvious to me that he fit a pattern, and their relationship fit a pattern, where he would certainly be capable of doing something like this.
Ware knew that neither Warren's drinking problem nor violent behavior proved he was a murderer. But he did believe the lack of gunshot residue on the victim's hand was telling.
Once again, thinking about it logically, that's something that's easy to wash off. He's a police officer, former police officer. He knows that. And he's certainly, if he was the one who pulled the trigger, certainly in a position to wash any gunshot residue off. As if it had been a suicide, then obviously she is not in a position to do that.
But nothing in Bonnie's actions pointed to suicide. She had actually scheduled a business trip for the day following the night she died.
No, I don't believe she had any.
The family turned to Dr. Cathal Grant, a noted forensic pathologist from Bedford, Texas, who specializes in performing psychological autopsies on people who have committed suicide.
Yeah.
Dr. Grant interviewed relatives, friends, and co-workers and heard consistent tales about how happy and upbeat Bonnie was.
She was very helpful and very,
Nothing in her life indicated she was contemplating suicide. She'd even kept hopeful fortune cookie messages in her purse. Dr. Grant concluded this did not fit the profile of a woman planning to shoot herself in the chest with a .38 caliber revolver.
Based on what I looked at, it appeared unlikely or extremely unlikely that she was the type of person that would take her own life.
To analyze the physical evidence, attorney Mike Ware enlisted the help of Dr. Tom Bevel, a renowned forensic scientist and expert in blood spatter analysis. Bevel set out to determine whether the blood found on Horenek's shirt was caused by the spray of a gunshot or by blood coughed up through the nose or mouth during CPR. The expectorant blood pattern would be quite different than the spray from a gunshot. In his lab, Bevel recreated a gunshot blood pattern fired from close range. He placed a t-shirt like the one Horinek wore that night in close proximity to a blood-soaked sponge. He then fired a weapon that was similar to the one found at the scene of the crime. The spray from the blood produced a blood spatter pattern on the t-shirt. He then examined the t-shirt, noting the droplet's characteristics. They were not consistent with expectorant blood.
Expectorant out of the mouth is a little bit lighter in color. Because air is what is forcing it out, there will be bubbles. Now, by the time that the police look at the resultant blood stains, what you will have is bubble rings because the bubble will have burst.
Expectorant blood droplets tend to be irregular in size. Bevel also examined the actual T-shirt Warren had on that evening.
The bloodstains that I looked at in this case did not appear to be lighter in color. They didn't have bubble rings. Most of the stains were fairly uniform in size.
Bevel counted more than 100 of these high-velocity blood spatters. Most no more than 1/10 of a millimeter in diameter, the size of a poppy seed. Bevel believed the existence of these tiny spatters positively concluded that Warren Horinek was in very close proximity to his wife when she was shot.
When I examined the T-shirt that was worn by Mr. Hornick, was able to find a good number of misting type bloodstains that would be consistent with what you would expect to find from a high velocity occurrence, such as backspatter.
The blood pattern of the gunshot test and the blood pattern on Hornick's actual T-shirt matched. It was not expectorant blood. This evidence meant only one thing. Dr. Bevel believed Warren Horinek pulled the trigger and killed his wife. Armed with this new forensic evidence, attorney Mike Ware presented the findings to the grand jury.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say will...
The grand jury voted to indict Warren Horinek. In March 1996, 1 year after the death of his wife, Horinek was arrested and charged with murder. With the accumulated evidence, investigators came up with a sequence of events that led to the murder. They concluded Warren Horinek had been drinking heavily. They believed he and Bonnie argued over her upcoming business trip. She eventually turned in, but Warren grew more enraged. He waited elsewhere in the house for her to fall asleep. One of his uncontrollable outbursts finally went too far. Warren Horinek killed his own wife.
If you look at his history, at his escalating patterns of domestic abuse, you know, I mean, this is all in retrospect, but it's clear which way he was headed.
In August 1996, after a week-long trial, Warren Horinek was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. When a murder occurs, assailants try to outsmart investigators by covering their tracks. Yet advances in forensic science bring even the smallest details to light, revealing the fatal impressions that lead killers directly to justice.